Greetings and thank you for tuning into Exposure. Super excited to have my cousin Ben Hunkler, here on the show today. And Stuart, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm sitting on the porch of my farm, and we're gonna try this Zoom thing out, see how it goes.
How are you, Ben?
I'm doing great, Jill. I'm so excited to be here. Really excited to talk with the both of you today.
Yeah, and I think we need a little history. I mean, how far back do we go? Mentioning the fact that I helped take care of you when you were a baby, and it was so wonderful. So, you're like one of the closest to me in the whole world. So that's exciting and needed to share. And also that pretty brilliant guy, and I was smart to ask you to come work for me several years ago now, when we were actively engaged in trying to find an alternative and fight the development of the PTTG ethane cracker plant and the Mountaineer storage facility, and also just in general making the connection with fracking to the petrochemical build out and plastic ultimately. And you showed up and joined our team just when we needed it, and you were so incredible and helping to spread the truth and increase our impactfulness. So yeah, super grateful for our connections in every way. But through your work here in the Ohio River Valley, you also kind of became connected with folks at the Ohio River Valley Institute. And so that's where you spend your brilliance these days and supporting the movement. So yeah, tell me about ORVI, the Ohio River Valley Institute, and your role there.
Geez, yeah, you flatter me, Jill. Thanks for saying all those nice things about me. So I'm the communications manager for ORVI. I've been working there for almost 4 years now, which feels like a long time. But we do a lot of research on several different issue areas. We do a lot of work to try to dispel the false narrative that the oil and gas and plastics industries are really the economic backbone of Appalachia and the Ohio River Valley states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. So we published a pretty kind of our inaugural landmark report called Frackalachia, which details the fact that the 22 largest gas producing counties in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia have actually lost jobs and population since the beginning of the fracking boom. And we do a lot of research on the other side too, trying to essentially build solutions and build alternative approaches to economic development. Investing in things like restoring abandoned mine lands, repairing abandoned oil and gas wells, investing in clean energy, things like energy efficiency upgrades, social services, public infrastructure, which we find that they're actually stronger local job creators than is fracking and petrochemical development in our region.
Yeah, and to be perfectly honest, have to thank Eric DePlace and the Heinz Endowments for bringing forth the Ohio River Valley Institute, ORVI, because basically the only way to say it was exactly what we needed. Like what ORVI has done for us is bring the evidence, bring the research, bring the data that confirms our experience here, which if you're not from the region and you're not immersed and surrounded by this industry, then you're probably likely to believe the lie,
Sure.
or the misinformation, however you want to put it, but so that's why it's just been so incredible to have the resources that ORVI has provided. And also on the solutions front, the PTTG site, we're still actively working on trying to develop an alternative idea plan project for that site, because that's when you can ultimately declare one of these projects dead, because the state who invested $70 million in the property for the PTTG cracker plant, Jobs Ohio, like it feels like they're just going to wait indefinitely for that company to decide, oh yeah, we're going to move forward with the cracker, which we know the market's not there. There's just no way that's going to happen. So it's just like all that taxpayer money has just been wasted to this point, preparing a site for a project that never got developed. So,
Right.
you know, part of what's been so great about our collaboration with ORVI is, you know, working towards finding the most realistic, and, you know, project that could be implemented there sooner than later, and hopefully taking that information to Jobs Ohio and working with them to build and create something that will, yes, diversify the economy, but also uplift the community instead of being another toxic emitter and polluter located in our communities.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to ask the question of what comes next, you know, after you defeat these petrochemical facilities. The community is there's still a hole there. There's still an economic hole, and we really at ORVI, we really believe in kind of a holistic approach to building shared prosperity in Appalachian communities.
So fantastic. Yeah, I'm really grateful. And so there's so many reports we could talk about, but you know, we decided to connect with you now because pretty compelling research that ORVI has compiled, just released, and I would love to have you go into that if you want to.
That'd be great. Yeah. So just yesterday, we released an updated poll on Pennsylvanians' attitudes toward fracking. We first published a survey on Pennsylvanians' attitudes toward fracking in the clean energy industry, and other related industries back in May of 2021. And because fracking has really entered the national prevailing narrative in the lead up to the presidential election, we decided that we wanted to update this research to see how Pennsylvanians' attitudes have evolved over time. The headline of our latest poll is that 9 in 10 Pennsylvania voters support stricter regulations on fracking. That includes things like requiring companies to disclose what sort of chemicals they're using in their drilling operations, requiring safer transport of fracking waste. Yeah, so important. Increasing setback distances between new fracking wells and schools and hospitals, and also increasing air monitoring, more regular air monitoring near fracking wells, compressor stations, and other infrastructure.
Wow, and Stuart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And you attended a briefing that ORVI did on this report. So yeah, interested to see what thoughts you have. You know, you live in Pennsylvania, so it's relevant, very relevant here.
Yeah, it's really interesting study. I love data. I love, like you said before, you know, there's these things that we kind of know to be intuitively true, but it's great to have the data that sort of backs up and supports those beliefs. One thing I would like to do that I think would be helpful for viewers just right off the bat before we really dive into the data is, can you talk, Ben, about the methodology of this study and just kind of lay out what, you know, how many people were involved and what demographics were involved, et cetera?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question. So this poll is one that we actually commissioned from our partners at Upswing Research. They did a survey of 700 likely Pennsylvania voters in September of 2024, which is last month. We made sure that our sample is representative of the Pennsylvania electorate demographically, geographically.
And so what I found was interesting, there was a couple things that I found interesting from the data that I'd like your perspective on. The biggest head scratcher for me, and I'm still trying to figure this out, is there was a metric that said that a lot of people didn't feel that they were nearby fracking, that fracking wasn't close to them. And that to me was a really surprising metric, considering that fracking has been such a big part of the zeitgeist in this region for so long.
Right.
Can you talk about that piece of data and kind of what that means to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was surprised by that stat also, because organizations like Frack Tracker have done some great research demonstrating how many Pennsylvania residents actually do live near fracking infrastructure or are affected by fracking-related air and water pollution. And I'm not really sure, frankly, what to attribute that to, what to attribute that perception that folks aren't living near infrastructure is. Of course, a lot of times these facilities can be kind of hidden. And I think that might have something to do with it. But yeah, a great question and something that we'd love to follow up with more polling research about.
But for me, I could see how, if they're not drilling or they're not fracking, it could be hidden, but if they're in either one of those phases, there's so much obvious noise pollution, light pollution, truck traffic. But maybe, you moved into an area, and the fracking wells had been there for 10 years, which can happen now in this region, and they haven't come back there, recirculate the wells, and so it's just kind of idle. But the thing about that is every part of this infrastructure in oil and gas leaks at every stage of the process. So that's what I'm always concerned about. Like, Stuart, we went and visited the pad last week near your home at the edge of your farm. And when you just look at it, when there's really not much going on, they haven't been back for a while to, like I said, drill or frack again. It looks relatively harmless. It's an eyesore and it's not pretty, but I want to get a FLIR camera and look at that pad next to your house and see what's leaking off of there, even when it doesn't, because you can't see it. That's the thing. A lot of time, you can't, these emissions are not visible with the naked eye. And so I think that's why some people hear sometimes like, oh, coal mining's way worse. It destroys the whole landscape. I'm like, I mean, there are hidden costs with coal too, but with the oil and gas industry, a lot of it you can't see. Yeah, you can smell it sometimes, but not all the time. So that's just the difference there,
Yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 because, it's almost as if the more activity that there is on a pad, the more obvious it is. But I don't know that it's necessarily safer or more dangerous, rather, because as the pad falls into neglect, as it becomes less useful for the industry, I almost worry about those pads more. They're less obvious, but because they are not being actively fracked, yeah, like they could just be leaking VOCs and no one's really paying attention. And like you said, you can't see it. Not always can you smell it. And so yeah, it's interesting to me. I've been down to Jill's in Ohio, and it's a totally different landscape than where I live. Where I live, fracking isn't as much in your face. I feel like you do have to kind of go down the side roads and the dirt roads and find them. Whereas down in Jill's part of Ohio, it's just, I mean, it's just everywhere. You can't not know that it's there. So I'd be interested to know if that same question posed to Ohio residents or residents in West Virginia would elicit the same answer.
It's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it is telling in a way too that, right, so Stuart, as you mentioned, just 12% of our survey respondents said that they do live within a mile of a fracking well, pipeline, or compressor station. An additional 26% say they're not sure. But despite the relatively low number of folks who say that they are proximate to this infrastructure, more than 90% say that they want stricter regulations on the practice. So yeah.
That's fantastic news, really. And I think to some extent, there's so many amazing organizations and individuals who've been working on these issues and trying to spread awareness for so long. So I do think, a lot of credit goes to the outreach and the advocacy work of some amazing folks in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Another key takeaway from this poll that I'll just mention really quickly is that 42% of Pennsylvania voters actually support an outright ban on fracking.
Wait. How what is the percentage?
42.
42% wants an outright ban on fracking.
A ban on fracking. That's right.
But
Which is pretty remarkable.
This demographic was diverse. It wasn't just people in our camp and our tribe, right?
Exactly. Yep, it's representative of the Pennsylvania electorate. That's right.
Wow, that's pretty stunning, really.
Exactly. And it corrects this, again, this prevailing national narrative that political candidates have to be gung-ho on fracking in order to win Pennsylvania, which is, of course, a key battleground state. So we're trying to push this out as much as possible. Again, the poll was just released yesterday. We've gotten some great coverage so far. But we want to make sure that across the nation, folks know that Pennsylvanians aren't necessarily monolithically supportive of the fracking industry. There's a lot of concern about fracking-related air and water pollution, and there is quite an appetite for restricting fracking activity altogether.
Yeah, I mean, that's really fascinating.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, in the data, did you see answers to questions that might indicate that there's more movement in one way or the other possible if you could close the gap on, educating
Mhm.
about certain aspects of the industry?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So again, 42% of voters said that they would support a ban on fracking, but 86% say they're concerned about water pollution and 82% say they're concerned about air pollution. So
I'm
I
sorry,
think
that makes
there's,
me giggle. I'm interrupting
right?
again. Let's just slow down a
Please.
minute and just
Yeah,
82% are concerned about
air pollution.
water contamination. And what was the other?
82% are concerned about air pollution.
Okay.
86%, slightly more, say they're concerned about water pollution.
It's
And,
like a
and
mix of emotions because I'm like, oh, that's so exciting and so encouraging.
Mhm.
And then the next thought is, how do we leverage that? How can we turn these statistics into action,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. We have to draw the lines, I think, between the fracking industry and between these pollution concerns, because they seem to be so prevalent, and we just need to make sure that folks recognize where this stuff is coming from.
well,
But
there's
also,
another,
like, it's the truth narrative. Like, the industry has all this money, and how
Mhm.
I don't even do a lot of this stuff, but I hear from people like, oh, if you're listening to, I'm not even gonna name names. If you're watching TV, listening to any of the radio news or all the Spotify stuff, like, aren't there ads on there all the time saying how great the industry is and how we're uplifting communities and energy independence and blah, 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 a bunch of BS. I want to cuss, but I'll calm down and just say, that's why we're here, why we're talking to you, like exposure, exposure, exposure. Let's get the funding to get our commercials and our narrative, the truth narrative, let's call it,
Yeah.
because that's what it is, out there as much as the industry is, and then we win. Am I right? Or is it like not that? I'm sure it's not that simple, but on some level, that's why they're winning, because they
Right.
control the media and the message and the narratives, period. I can't believe that if the majority of Americans knew what it's really like and what it really does to our community, our air, our water, our children's health,
Mhm.
our future, that they would like not be pushing 100% as much as every one of us are in this movement to make the changes that we need to implement the alternative. Period.
well,
Absolutely.
there's an important um, part of what you just said there, Jill. And, you know, having a concern about something is not the same as understanding that your concern is justified, right? And I think one of the other important metrics of this study was that despite the high concern for pollution, um, I believe it was kind of low in terms of how many people understood the health impacts that the industry um, that are associated with the industry.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right, Stuart.
So I think part of it is, you have a high concern, but then at the same time, you have a low understanding of the connection. And so I think that's where one of the key gaps is that we have to work to fill, is to really get people to understand that there is a lot of research, there is a lot of science, there are a lot of connections that have been drawn already
Mhm.
between these industries, um, and negative health outcomes, negative pregnancy outcomes, etc.
Mhm.
And
The
then,
fact that it's, in Pennsylvania, very clearly, like there's what's happening with the children in Pennsylvania and the health impacts, like, yeah, I mean, there's some compelling evidence, and it's just so horrifying, really, to know what these parents and families are going through. But I have to say it, didn't the state's kind of downplaying it, for lack of how else can I say it? Like, that's the simplest way, and the least incriminating thing I can say is that the state are downplaying and not paying attention to these studies and these struggles of these families like they should, right?
Absolutely. And yeah, as you're saying earlier, Jill, it's difficult to fight against misinformation and disinformation because the industry is just they're propagandizing about the health impacts and the ramifications of fracking development. The Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania Department of Public Health study that you mentioned showed that there is a correlation between proximity to fracking activity and an increased risk of asthma and childhood cancer. But then companies like CNX are partnering with the Pennsylvania government, publishing studies that purportedly demonstrate that there is no air pollution, water pollution from fracking industries. That they're trying to dispute the scientific findings that have been published by Pennsylvania's own Department of Health. And so it's so important to try to correct those narratives, but it just takes a lot of work. It's difficult.
yeah, I don't know enough of the details to really speak too much about it, but I did see a couple weeks ago that the Shapiro administration in Pennsylvania had contracted a fracking company to do a study of fracking safety, and the company determined that fracking was safe. And I just thought that
Right.
it's just, and it kind of, not to always go back to East Palestine, but it's kind of the same thing we saw
Mhm.
there, where like Norfolk Southern was basically given so much leeway and so much control over the cleanup and the designation of danger there. And it's like, we're using the word, I don't want to use the word criminal because that seems like uh, dangerous territory, but like as a metaphor, it's like you're letting the criminal clean up the crime scene, so to speak,
Exactly.
and
Right.
it's just it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But I think studies like this are really important. And you know like, I think the health studies or the environmental studies are really critical in showing the connection between the industry and the damage. But
Mhm.
studies like this one that we're talking about now are really important in showing where people's minds are at, and like how can we better communicate the health and environmental impacts with people who have legitimate concerns and statistically overwhelmingly would support either heavy restrictions or in some cases maybe even an outright ban.
Right.
um, you got to get them there through the information though, right? And you got
Mhm.
to close those gaps of understanding.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, like with a study like this and with
Mhm.
the other work that ORVI has done in the past, do you get a lot of traction with like state officials? I mean, do you have relationships with people in government that you can take a study like this to and say, here, we just found this out? Um, or do you find that people in those positions are kind of hard to get to or don't care? I mean, what's your take on that?
Sure. Yeah. It's been tough to get our foot in the door with local elected officials, honestly. And we have had some success in certain counties in Ohio and Pennsylvania. We've developed some relationships with folks who just recognize the value of our research and the value of investing in things like people-centered economic development strategies, the pitfalls of continued investment in the fracking and petrochemical industries. But oftentimes we're bringing this information to folks who are kind of predisposed against us. which is tricky. You know, there's a lot of disinformation, as we've discussed out there, about the health impacts, the job impacts of the gas industry. And so it's at times an uphill battle, trying to convince them of what the situation really is in our region.
But you did have some success working with, was it Ohio County in West Virginia too?
Yeah, we had a meeting with them a couple years ago, talking about some of our senior researcher, Sean O'Leary's investigations into the benefits of investing in things like energy efficiency upgrades and clean energy development. And you know, they weren't necessarily super receptive, but we had a conversation. And I think that that's, again, just the first step toward developing a relationship. And these are folks that we need to move, you know, these are the people that we need to be talking to build a better future.
Well, and why didn't I remember this one sooner? But you and Sean and I met with the Belmont County Commissioners.
Exactly, right.
And at that point, we were talking about the Centralia model, which maybe we can go into a little bit. But we were presenting information about diversifying the economy,
Yep.
and economic development ideas, and specifically the Centralia model, which I'll let you explain a little bit if you can. But I just want to finish my thought, which was the reception we had from them was fine, but it's ultimately like, well, this sounds expensive, and get the money and then come back and talk to us, kind of. You know what I mean? Like, put all the work on us to bring in something incredible that would create jobs and not be a polluter, but you get the money and then we'll get involved. What? But they waited, and every time, even still, you know, maybe last year sometime, like a commissioner was like, the cracker plant's still going to save the region, and we're still confident it's coming. And like for 8 years, that's their only idea, was like fracking and petrochemicals. And how long are we going to wait for that to manifest before you get off your asses and start looking for the better alternatives? Makes me so angry.
Sure. We've run into similar obstacles in a lot of our conversations with other county commissioners who've said, right, like, sure, this is a fine idea, where's the funding? But the good news is that there is funding for this sort of stuff now. The Inflation Reduction Act allocates funding for a lot of the investment recommendations that we outline in the Centralia report, which, Jill, as you mentioned, is a study that our senior researcher, Sean O'Leary, again, conducted in, I think that was 2022. And he took a look at this coal community in Centralia, Washington, that was facing the closure of their coal-fired power plant and the closure of their coal mine, which were the two largest employers in the county. This county was like, you know, what do we do? We're going to lose thousands of jobs. We need to put together a plan for how our economy is eventually going to rebound once these facilities phase out. And the county decided to invest in energy efficiency retrofits, which includes things like HVAC installations, better insulation, updated appliances that use less energy than older models, in addition to education and clean energy development. And we found that, or Sean found rather, that just a couple years after the community of Centralia decided to reallocate funding from these coal facilities toward cleaner investments and things like that, their economy turned around. They were losing jobs, but just 2 years later, after making these investments, Centralia actually started to gain jobs again at a rate higher than the national average. Population started to increase after it had been declining for several years. And the entire economy was just revitalized by refocusing their investments from fossil fuels into the clean energy future.
Woo!
Right? We're
So,
celebrating.
you know, that, and so we basically presented that information right there to the Belmont County Commissioners. And like I said, their response was, I mean, it's not like they didn't kind of like the idea, and one more than the others were like, oh, this, yeah, they were, you know, they heard us, but it just basically, they're not willing to put any time or energy into to making that happen, that they like put that on us. Yes. Show us the money and then we'll help you.
Right, right. Yeah.
But meanwhile, states and the federal government and municipalities will show these companies a lot of money, or shell out, you know, a lot of subsidies and tax credits and things. So I just think that's
Absolutely.
worth noting.
Absolutely.
So it
Yeah,
sounds to me like when I listen to all of this, what my takeaway is that the voters in Pennsylvania, um, across the board, like, you know, I'm sure there's discrepancies when you break down the demographics, Republican, Independent, Democrat, but generally speaking, Pennsylvania voters are concerned about pollution. They're concerned about their health. They're more than open to regulating the industry more. But from the political standpoint, from the policymaker standpoint, they seem to be hung up on this notion of the economic driving engine of the oil and gas industry, which is not really accurate. And so,
exactly.
It's not based in reality. It's not
right.
based in reality. It's not real. It's their, I don't even know. I'm not even going to name it. It's just false.
Absolutely.
False narrative versus truth narrative. What do you want? What's the time for now? You know?
Yeah, and you would think that at this point, you know, I feel like being a policymaker and kind of falling for that false narrative early on is maybe like a little forgivable, but at this point, you know, you got to question, like, why do they continue to double down on this false narrative? Why do they continue to believe this fantasy? And I think that that's a really important question that needs to be explored. And I'm wondering if through kind of your perspective, Ben, with the data, do you see any cracks in that? I mean, do you have any real understanding of like why they continue to double down on this false narrative?
If only I could read minds, Stuart. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but the thing is, at the end of the day, if you're investing in oil and gas, you're getting a bad deal. And that's something you just can't deny. That's something that federal data statistics indicate is that the more money you invest in the fracking industry, the more you're investing in an outdated model of economic development, one that's too narrow, so that when the industry inevitably booms and busts, you're losing jobs, you're losing population. And right, we just have to figure out a way to get through to these local policymakers who really hold the levers of economic development, that there is a lot of concern about what the industry is putting out into our communities. And there's actually a lot of support for the kinds of broadly beneficial, clean industries that could actually revitalize our communities, regenerate job growth, bring folks back to our region.
Right.
Yeah, I can't say it any better than that.
Say that again.
Can't say it any better than that.
Right. But then are there any other statistics that we should know about that this report detailed?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of the tenets of the Centralia model that I just mentioned, the investments in clean energy, the investments in energy efficiency upgrades are overwhelmingly popular among Pennsylvania voters, according to this new survey. So we found that 80% of our survey respondents say they have a favorable opinion of solar energy, 73% support wind, and 84% support spending taxpayer dollars on wind and solar development to increase renewable energy usage in the state.
That's pretty compelling too.
So there you go. Right. So yeah, I mean, to your earlier question, Stuart, about just like why is this not getting through to policymakers? I think we also need to make the case that these investments are really popular among Pennsylvania voters, and that these policymakers are beholden to the folks that they represent, and they need to recognize that there's broad support for investing in clean energy and transitioning our economy to one that doesn't pollute our communities and put our families in harm's way.
I think it's worth reiterating too that it's broad bipartisan support among voters.
Right, right, absolutely.
What else is in this study that really jumps out at you that is either surprising or reiterates something that you think is an important point to get across?
Sure, sure. Another key point is that the percentage of Pennsylvania voters who have a favorable opinion of the oil and gas industry has actually fallen since we originally conducted the first poll in 2021. It's down to 45% from 52% just a couple of years ago. And the plastics industry favorability has dropped even further, down to about 25%. So I think it's really telling that folks are recognizing just how how much these industries are really out for their own bottom line, and that they don't have the best interests of the community at hand.
I might be misremembering here, but in that same data set that you just mentioned, wasn't there also other industries that were very favorable?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the clean energy industry enjoys pretty broad favorability. Let me find that number really quickly. The clean energy industry polls at 62% favorability, which is higher than the oil and gas industry and the plastics industry.
So the connection between plastic and fracking, so many people don't know that. There's so many people even living in the shale fields, living with the oil and gas industry, living with petrochemical facilities in or near their communities. But a lot of folks still don't understand that you frack first, goes to an ethane cracker plant, and eventually it makes plastic. I mean, fracking of plastic, it really is the one same machine. And I think we need to continue to expose that, that, you can't have plastic without fracking. And so once again, I know there are a lot of different strategies about, trying to rein back the oil gas industry. And some people say, well, let's just focus on the new development that's relying on fracking. And that's important and powerful. But I also think, as we're talking about narratives and the truth that needs to be told, like all the health impacts, all the research, all the evidence about how toxic plastic really is to every part of life on this planet. If you can make people understand at the same time, add in all the fracking impacts, and it's the worst absolute possible thing anybody could be investing in or producing. It has to stop. There's just no way forward. We have to stop it. And we have to figure out how to deal with all the waste we've already created and, stop making more of it. And there is no good way to deal with the waste. Now it's like the false solutions about chemical recycling and basically the lies that the petrochemical industry are spreading now that we can solve it through recycling. Well, no, it's just another. Oh, sorry, Ben, you know about that too. I'm getting off on a roll here and I don't want to go too far down, but do you hear me?
Absolutely. It's so frustrating. And I do think that there's a really big opportunity for us and for the broader environmental movement to make that connection between fracking and plastics, especially because so many people have really negative associations with the plastics industry, with just the amount of plastic waste that's in our oceans and rivers and waterways. And I think that the more we can demonstrate that link, the more we can move folks towards support.
There's two slides in this presentation that I think are pretty interesting together. One of them is that it shows that people generally believe that fracking should continue to provide cheaper energy. So that that seems to indicate like they support more of a phase out as opposed to like a tomorrow ban. But you also have in here that one of the chief concerns of people in this election is energy costs, and that energy prices have gone up and have been felt by basically everybody. And so that's an interesting sort of contradiction in perception to me, that people they are viewing fracking as a vehicle for cheaper energy, and yet in a very heavily fracked state, their energy costs have continued to rise, and they mark that as something that they really care about.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's another one of those I think broadly held misconceptions that it's up to us to try to correct, is that the natural gas industry loves to talk about how natural gas has made energy cheaper for Pennsylvanians and folks across the Ohio River Valley, and data shows that that's just not true. Pennsylvanians' energy bills are rising and have continued to rise since the beginning of the fracking boom, despite all the gas that's been produced. And we really need to broadcast the fact that, families are struggling with higher energy bills at a time when they're also struggling with inflation. I know that's a huge concern among not just Pennsylvanians, but folks across the nation. And there are really viable opportunities to invest in wind and solar and energy that can be a lot cheaper than natural gas. Texas is a great example of that, actually. We did some research recently on comparing the energy bills of Pennsylvanians, West Virginians, Ohioans, folks in our region, to the energy bills from Texas, where solar energy has vastly expanded just in the last 5 or 10 years. And we found that Texans' energy bills have plummeted as energy bills have risen in our region, where we're still reliant on natural gas and especially coal in West Virginia's case.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some really
So,
interesting opportunities to take the Centralia model that you were discussing and combine that with solar. I mean, we could be, rather than subsidize, just off the top of my head example here, you could be subsidizing for home improvements and home efficiency projects while at the same time putting solar on rooftops as you go, so there's a lot of creative ways
right.
that we could solve a lot of these problems
Mhm.
if only the policymakers were willing to do the work and
Exactly.
start thinking a little bit outside the box.
Absolutely, Stuart. And yeah, and there's just so many benefits to clean energy. As you mentioned, solar and wind, they're cheaper energy sources right now than your natural gas plants, and especially coal plants. They increase quality of life. You don't have to deal with the noise pollution, the truck traffic that's associated with fracking. They make our communities cleaner and safer for our families and our children. And these are reliable energy sources that over in Weirton, West Virginia, they're making batteries for renewable energy storage. So we can rely on wind and solar to produce energy. We can store it so that we can then extract from those batteries when the sun might not be shining or the wind isn't blowing. And another thing is that people love to talk about energy independence. That's a big talking point of the natural gas industry. But true energy independence is sourcing your energy from the sun and from the wind. These are sources that, have just powered our Earth since time immemorial. We don't have to be beholden to the oil and gas industry and to commodity markets overseas, where prices are fluctuating and such. There are just so many benefits to transitioning our economy from one that's based around natural gas to one that's based around clean energy like wind and solar.
Yeah, and
That's so
you
true,
would,
Ben. To try to be a little more hopeful, I mean, doesn't your the results from your study prove that? I mean, that seems like people know it, but then it comes back again. Who's going to implement it? Where's the money to implement it? And just in general, like my dad installed solar panels enough to charge his electric vehicle, and so he's just like, it's just so amazing. Like I'm driving down the road and I'm powered by the sun. Like he is
Isn't
thrilled
that cool?
that he made that investment. Not everybody can afford to do that. I can't, but I'm saying those who can really, how about doing it? Start with the people who have the money to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's only getting cheaper too, Jill. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how much the cost of new wind and solar has plummeted in the last 10 years even. It's becoming more and more accessible to folks. Also due to the fact that there are federal subsidies for installing solar panels on your house and federal subsidies for utility scale big solar and wind farms. We're seeing projects crop up throughout Appalachia, throughout the nation, that are really going to diversify our fuel mix nationally and state by state. And it's just, I think that the energy transition is coming, it's already underway, and it's up to local policymakers to decide whether or not we're going to jump on board and be a part of a clean energy future, or whether we're going to be stuck in a polluting oil and gas industry economy that hasn't produced economic returns for more than a decade.
Okay, and on that note, you know, as we've worked together over these years, no matter what meeting or we were hosting or who we were talking to, what we were putting out on social media, like, it's really nice to have a directive, to have a call to action, to have something we can suggest for people to do, to get involved, to feel like they have a way to make a difference. Like, do you have any suggestions for what people can do to help promote the truth, or what they can do with this report? I mean, not to put you on the spot, but just curious. You too, Stuart, you know?
Yeah, I'll give that a shot. I think that the number one thing you can do is just talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends about this stuff, share your opinions on the clean energy industry and the potential benefits of wind and solar, and share your concerns, share your grievances about the gas industry and the pollution that it has released on our communities, the health effects that it has released in our communities. We just need to be having these conversations among friends, among family members, in our communities, and eventually with our local elected officials, excuse me, who really hold the levers of power and who are kind of bottlenecking really our transition to an economy that just works better for everyone, that reduces energy bills, that makes our economy stronger, produces more local jobs, it keeps our families safer and healthier. There are so many benefits to recognizing the utility and the potential of transitioning our economy from oil and gas to clean energy. And we just need to start talking about it and keep talking about it. Make sure that our friends and neighbors know what's out there and what we can really, the future that we can build together.
Absolutely.
And if people want to see this study for themselves and read through it, as well as all the other great research that ORVI has done, where can they find that? I mean, we'll link it too, but
Sure. Yeah, please check us out at www.ohiorivervalleyinstitute.org. We've got a lot of great research reports and blog posts. We publish a weekly newsletter that comes out on Fridays at noon, that summarizes the latest research developments and any relevant news pieces, opportunities to get involved. We'd love to have you check out our work, and if you're interested in getting more involved, please reach out to us. We're always happy to provide materials for folks, fact sheets and one pagers if you do want to talk to your neighbors, or if you want to attend a county commission meeting and share this research with your elected officials. We're happy to provide you with information, materials, talking points. And again, I think it really is, it comes down to having conversations with people in your community and with people who really make the decisions around time.
That's so great, Ben. And I also want to say that we want you to keep coming back and let us know as these reports come out. And I wish I'd like to have you come back actually and talk about all the reports that have benefited us so far. But for this episode, again, the name of the report, and that they can find it at ORVI's website to get more information. And so the name of the report is?
The name of the report, it's our 2024 Pennsylvania fracking poll. it doesn't have a catchy name. We might have to add one later. But again, it paints a picture of how the Pennsylvania electorate thinks about fracking, thinks about clean energy and other issues. And we'd love for you to check it out.
No, thank you so much, Ben. And yeah, fun seeing you last week.
Likewise.
And enjoy the big city, and can't wait to be together again. And if it has to be through Zoom for now, keep coming back. And thank you so much. And to ORVI for all your incredible support. Yeah, guidance protection. Thanks everyone for listening. Exposure is brought to you by Ohio Valley Allies. To find out more and learn how to take action, please visit ohiovalleyallies.org. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes as we dive deeper into these crucial issues and speak with impacted communities, experts, researchers, and industry insiders.